See you on this brisk Friday morning. I'm going to make a couple direct statements about the matters before us and that will be before us in the coming week. Speaker Bosma is my friend, and he's going through a very difficult time. And I've called upon him on a number of different occasions to set this extremely controversial and divisive marriage amendment aside. And I'm not going to do that today, because I'm sensitive to the fact that he's really having to strike a balance between what in effect is two Republican parties right now. I am, however, going to call on the authors of HJR 3, Representatives Turner and Thompson, to let their boss off the hook. They need to be the ones to say that this matter is not going to move forward anymore. It has diverted all of our energies. Just yesterday, I talked to my good friend, Representative Christina Hale, who learned from the Centers for Disease Control that 1 in 6 women has been raped or sexually assaulted here in Indiana. She had a simple bill that said, why don't we delve into this problem that everyone agrees is a calamity for Indiana women. Let's figure out the root causes and identify some solutions. And she was told, look, we don't have enough time to deal with this year by one of the committee chairs. This is an example of how we're just being sapped of our ability to do good things for Indiana because of this specter that's hovering over everyone. I want to announce sort of where House Democrats are going to be this coming week. Clearly, we want the measure set aside. We want to focus on Indiana's real problems. But we understand that we have a role in at least trying to get this measure thrown in the dustbin. And there's a couple of different options. I have prepared, and I am going to file, as the House Democratic leader, an amendment to delete the second sentence of HJR 3. Whether I offer this amendment is going to be a decision that I make in consultation with my caucus members. But the goal is the same. Let's get it set aside. But we have a couple different paths that we can go. The first is to extinguish the one obvious stink bomb of the second sentence. And if they're going to insist on moving this thing forward, let's at least get that that monstrous language out of there. That's one approach. The other approach is to consider simply letting HJR 3 lie under its or die under its own lumbering brontosaurus-like weight. That's a consideration as well. But the end is the same. Let's get this set aside for the good of the people of Indiana. I remember what it was like in my beautiful community of Michigan City just a few years ago. And I surveyed my constituents, and you know what? They were pretty evenly divided about whether we should be doing this constitutional amendment or not. I surveyed them again this year. And while not scientific, it is instructive of how your likely voters are thinking about an issue. And this year was more than 2 to 1. Let's focus on other things. Let's not go through this tawdry business of amending the Constitution over something that people aren't as rattled about as some inside this chamber are. That's my statement for today. Those are my thoughts. That's some reflection and light on the week ahead. Be happy to entertain any questions.
What do you mean by let it die of its own weight?
Well, this thing is really taking on water from every day there's new concerns emerging about what that second sentence does. And like I said, these are tactical questions. We want the amendment to go away. And if the sense is that it has a better chance of going away either legislatively or at the ballot box by letting it stay bad, then that's one approach. But there's also a sense, too, that at least for this session, we might have a time or a way of getting it set aside by getting that second sentence out of there. Those are very practical legislative decisions, Jim. And we're going to consider that as a group. And I know the House Republican Caucus is going to be considering these things as a group, because we know that they have many of the same anxieties that we have about the continuance of this measure. But I will say that a House Democratic effort to delete the second sentence is amongst the toolbox of options that we'll have in the coming week.
Do you think a Republican will offer that same amendment, or do you think Boswell won't be?
I know that some Republicans want to offer it, and they want to get credit for offering it. But I don't know what the consequences for those members will be. I mean, there aren't. The Democratic members don't have anything to fear from the Speaker. Okay, they know that he probably wants them defeated in the next election. Okay, that's an open question. When you get within a caucus, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And when you begin to stray from the herd, you've all been around this building. You know that there's ways that speakers can achieve their goals. But I want to add one more thing. I'm going to acknowledge again, I think the Speaker's been in a very difficult position, and I think it's time for Representatives Turner and Thompson to be leaders and to go to their Speaker and say it's time to pull the plug on this.
If the second sentence is deleted, do you think the process restarts?
Well, that's for one of those activist judges to decide. I don't know the answer to that, and you know what? It's not up to me to figure that out for him. Okay, there's different questions. I know there's alternate legal points of view, and that's not within my purview to figure out. Mine is to identify the substance and how do you achieve the best policy goal, which is to get the focus back on economics here in Indiana.
So you haven't decided yet whether you will offer this amendment?
Well, I'm no different than my counterpart across the aisle. I'm going to consult with my individual caucus members because they have a say in this too. They're my board of directors, and I listen to them about the best path, and we're gonna have those discussions.
Scott, if you look at all the twists and turns this whole thing has gone through, whether it was last year and having to wait for the Supreme Court, this year with judiciary, and then being switched over, what does it tell you about this whole process in HJR 3?
Well, you know, we've seen some things over the past few years that are not likely to repeat themselves, or hopefully won't, with a great deal of frequency. I think this is a demonstration of what happens when you demagogue an issue before you know how public opinion is going to settle in the intermediate and long term. Because look, I've said this before, this monster has been created in a political laboratory. And once it's been unleashed upon everyone, it's hard to get it back in its cage. And I think that's what the Speaker's grappling with now. He employed this political device with great effectiveness for a number of years, but then you also have to think about whether you're ever going to be stuck with it in the long term. And now he's stuck with it. But that doesn't mean I can't be empathetic for him. He made decisions, and now he's having to endure some of the consequences. But I think that there's some members of his own party can help him out of the situation.
Do you think there are enough Republicans to defeat it, or at least amend it?
I don't know the answer to that, because the Republicans members don't usually run up to the Democratic leader and whisper in my ear about how they're going to vote. But I suspect that I do know from public comments there's a number of them are very conflicted about whether to move forward with this, and they do want to be talking about other things. They want to get back to debating economics with Democrats. They enjoy that part. This they don't enjoy.
Are all your caucus members going to vote against it, or do you think you still have some?
As HJR 3 in its current form, I'm pretty confident that there's unanimity or very near unanimity.
Bosma said yesterday he wouldn't cut off debate on the amendment. Is there a prospect of a sort of a rolling filibuster as each member uses his full time?
I don't know. I think that there's going to be cogent arguments made. If we're put through this debate, I think there'll be good arguments made that will help frame the discussion as it begins to go before the public.
I just want to clarify something. So your decision whether or not to offer the amendment on the floor that would strip out the second sentence will rest on whether you and your caucus decide it will be easier to defeat HJR 3 with or without the second sentence.
That's a top consideration. That's a top consideration. The goal is how do we dispense with this as quickly as possible, and part of the decision making tree that I have to go through as the minority leader is trying to ascertain what my counterparts across the aisle are thinking and what their plans are. I don't know the answer to those things. I don't know if the Speaker intends to allow a Republican member to introduce an amendment to delete the second sentence. I don't know what pressures the Republicans are feeling. But that's something that we have to try to understand better, and that helps us make our decisions as a minority party. And we have to bring together all those perspectives and ideas, and through believe it or not, dealing with members is not any different than dealing with constituents. You have to listen, and as you listen, you build consensus, and most of the time you come up with a pretty good approach.
What's your response to the argument that a lot of supporters of HJR 3 made in the last two committee hearings that this should be an issue that Hoosiers should have a say, Hoosiers should have the right to vote? They seem to just sort of beating that mantra every 5 seconds.
Well, it's a cop-out, and it's always been a cop-out. That's not the process. The process is that the two independently elected legislatures do every bit of analysis that they possibly can. You don't just throw any idea that somebody has out to the voters. You can apply that to anything. I mean, every bill that Representative Thompson introduces, he could say, hey, let's throw it out to the voters. Well, I don't think anyone in the legislature would agree that that would be good politically or good from a policy standpoint. That's just the idea that you just sort of let things float through the legislature on the way to the ballot box. That's not the process, and any characterizations that is the process are incorrect.
I've not heard any other suggested amendments beyond deleting the second sentence. Are you aware of any others that you anticipate?
There's lots of different ideas, but this is of such magnitude. I really believe that you can't get cute on this. You have to address the substance directly. You've been around this building. Lots of people come up with lots of neat ideas, but this isn't an occasion for neat ideas. This is an occasion for dealing with one of the most serious topics before the public in a serious way.
Do you think the Democrats have a better chance of picking up seats if the amendment as is on the ballot in November?
I don't know. And that's because people feel differently about this in different parts of Indiana. Okay, in my part of Indiana, as just reported to you, people think we ought to be focused on getting folks back to work and making their incomes better, and they're not focused on this. But I also recognize that my part of Indiana is not every part of Indiana. There's voters here that sent Representatives Turner and Thompson to the General Assembly for a reason. They like what they think. So it seems like they have up to this point. The results speak for themselves.
Well,
So what I'm saying is that's an ambiguous question, and you also cannot let that be the guide, and you can't let that be instructive for how you're going to approach things legislatively.
Do you think it's a better chance to stop it in the House versus the Senate this year?
I don't know as many of these senators. There's a lot of new faces over there, and that's the discussions they have over in the Senate that tend to be in whisper tones, and they just don't reach our ears over here. But I do know that David Long has a eclectic mix of personalities. So we'll have to. That's a question for Tim Lannon. I've never had any mental mastery of the Senate chamber. Yeah, Jim.
Well, you mentioned the voters supporting Eric Turner so far. I understand that somebody from your party is going to file to run against him. Do you think he's vulnerable?
it's a very heavily Republican area. I mean, it is, and these are very gerrymandered districts. And I've said all along that my caucus, because of the winds of national politics and because of the maps, and frankly because a lot of the resources that line up on the other side. I mean, we have for my part, I've been very open. This is a multi-cycle effort to build a new governing coalition. So, you know, whether it's not easy for me to say that any particular Republican member is vulnerable, but I do know that when you sort of step in front of the winds of change, sometimes voters take a second look at you, and they reassess whether they've been making the right decisions about you for a period of time. But I think my friend, Representative Turner, is pretty confident that he has a lot of bedrock conservatives there around Gas City. Have appreciated his service. You've been a great group. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.